Picture this, if you will. You're sitting in a cafe. It's summer. You're hot. You order a soft drink, Coke, maybe. And the waiter looks at you and asks, Chladená, alebo nechladená? Chilled or unchilled? In Britain, if a waiter asked you whether you wanted your cold drink cold, you'd probably assume they were having some kind of episode. Excuse me, sir, but would you like your refreshing beverage served cold or lukewarm? While Americans often complain that UK drinks aren't cold enough, in Slovakia a significant number of people will genuinely choose the lukewarm option. And that tells you almost everything you need to know about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start today's journey with Pranostiky, folk proverbs about the weather, which Slovakia seems to have a lot more of than Britain. We have red sky at night, shepherd's delight, red sky in the morning, sailor's warning. There are more, but I doubt many people under 50 have ever heard them, apart from maybe St. Swithin's Day, July the 15th. If it rains, according to legend, it'll rain for 40 days. Slovakia has its own version, Medardova kvapka, St. Medard's drop on June the 8th. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Slovaks seem to have a proverb for practically every day of the year. My favourite is probably tri zmrznuti muži, or tri zmrzlini, as I like to call them. The three frozen men, or ice creams. Saints Pancrats, Servats and Bonifats, whose feast days fall on the 12th, 13th and 14th of May, and are said to bring the last cold snap of the year. Every year, without fail, my wife's parents, Babka and Jedko, cannot resist planting their garden before these fateful dates. They see the sunshine in April, get excited, and in go the tomatoes. And then they spend an anxious few weeks wondering whether the frosts will destroy their seedlings. Meanwhile, we never get round to planting until the last possible moment, and use the frozen men as our excuse every single time. Slovakia has a whole calendar built around the cold. The months with an R, September through to April, are the months of caution. Easter marks the first transition. People often put their winter clothes away around then. And tri zmrznuti is the final hurdle, the last cold ambush before the summer months of freedom. Slovaks have always watched the cold carefully, and in agricultural terms this makes a world of sense. But the fear of the cold that many Pranostiky symbolise runs so much deeper. Yes, Slovaks can survive bears, wolves, ticks, even communism. They can have their teeth drilled with no anaesthetic, and they can plunge themselves into freezing water with barely a frown. But crack a window in your classroom for a bit of fresh air, and within 3 seconds half of them will be shivering and saying, Moje kríže. I've mentioned the prievan before, the draught, the silent killer, but I want to go a bit deeper today because I think it deserves it. When I first moved to Humene in 1998, we lived on the 5th floor of a prefabricated Panelak block of flats. And one afternoon I made the catastrophic mistake of leaving 2 windows open and a door open in between. The resulting draft was so powerful that the door slammed shut and the glass in it shattered. I had to call Pan Zoba, the director of the school subletting as the flat, and shamefacedly explain that a prievan had taken out his door. He took it pretty well. That was genuinely the last time I had a real problem with a draft. But it seems, as with a great many things, that I am in the minority in Slovakia. My daughter is 17 and seems to have inherited my affection for fresh air. She sits at the front of her classroom, next to the open window. 30 teenagers in an overheated space in January, you understand. And she tells me that if she turns round, she will find a whole gaggle of city girls behind her, with their coats on, teeth chattering, literally begging her to close it. In my own classroom, I'll open the windows to air the room, and I'll turn round 30 seconds later to find a student has already closed them. I genuinely believe that some of them would seal them with tape if they had the chance. Window politics can creep into the workplace too. One student explained how he'd gone into a stuffy office in winter and asked his colleagues if he couldn't open a window for some fresh air. They refused, assuring him that nikto ešte neumrel od smradu. Nobody ever died from smell. And it's not just at school or work. Students report to me regularly about public transport. Someone will open a window on a stuffy, crowded bus with no functioning air conditioning, and the person behind will give it approximately 5 seconds before leaning forward to close it again. One student told me about a biology teacher who fell asleep on a night train. During the journey, a student kept opening the window. The teacher subsequently developed pneumonia over the Christmas holidays. I want to just sit with that for a moment. A biology teacher, pneumonia, open window on a train. The comments on my Tichý Zabiják short were illuminating. Some people protested. But almost 500 likes on when they're slandering your team but they're low-key right, tell a different story. Now, here's the thing. Slovaks are not alone in this belief, and nor am I in my skepticism. In Germany, they have Durchzug, cross-ventilation. Same belief, same fear of moving indoor air. The German Red Cross actually tweeted in 2019 that it is not harmful. The tweet went viral because the belief is so deeply embedded that official medical denial of it becomes news. If you draw a rough line across Europe, you get a kind of spectrum. In Scandinavia, cold air is considered actively healthy. Norwegian kindergarteners nap outside in sub-zero temperatures. The explicit cultural belief is that children are not born with a weather bias, but pick up negative attitudes towards cold from adults. Cold is something to engage with, not defend against. In Britain, cold is not so much embraced as tolerated, like so very many other things. They're fundamentally pretty hardy. I visited the UK in March and felt positively Slovak as I shivered in my 3 layers while surrounded by Widnesians in shorts and t-shirts. British cold is something to be stubbornly resisted with a stiff upper lip. Complaining too loudly will attract looks of disapproval and suggestions to put a bloody jumper on. As we have seen, in Germany and Central Europe, cold is genuinely dangerous, and it seems to become more specifically threatening the further east you go. In Leipzig, a draught might give you a cold, but in Snina, going out in a crop top in winter will give you kidney damage, and going out without a hat might just lead to meningitis. Related to the prievan, but worth its own moment, the thermostat. I've noticed, and I want to be careful here because I'm not sure this is uniquely Slovak, that people respond to extreme cold outside by whacking the heating up to full. Not the desired temperature, but substantially in excess of it, as if the heating needs encouragement. I regularly start up my car, only to be met with a blast of scorching air from the aircon, because the morning was a little frosty last time my wife used the car. To be fair to my long-suffering family, we keep our living room at about 19 to 20 degrees in winter, a couple of degrees less at night, and in the bedrooms, and maybe a couple more in the bathroom in the morning. And they don't complain too much. But when visiting other people's places, and in talking to my students, it's become clear that we are, shall we say, on the low side. And that's at least partly explained by history. Communist-era central heating in panel blocks was communal, often excessive, and free at the point of use. There was no incentive to turn it down. In fact, you'd be a fool not to take advantage of the opportunity to swan around in your underpants. A generation of town and city dwellers grew up with very warm interiors as the norm, and that preference got passed on. Meanwhile, in the UK, I took a photo of this thermometer on the wall of the communal living room of my mum's apartment block, which is exclusively for retirees. 16.5 to 22.5 is comfortable for most people. Above that, too hot, you're wasting energy. 13.5 to 16.5 is a bit cool. Imagine that in Slovakia. A bit cool. And then there's air conditioning. We have it at home. We heat with it in the winter and cool with it when it climbs above 25 outside. Oh, I love it. It has reduced my heating bills and saved me from 3 or 4 months of genuine misery every summer. And as a quality of life improvement, it's up there with triple glazing. But aircon is kryptonite for many Slovaks. An electrically powered prievan. The same belief, different technology. There is a version of the aircon objection I have some sympathy with, the thermal shock theory. Going from 38 degrees outside into a 16-degree office is probably not ideal, I'd agree. But notice the asymmetry. Going from a warm house into the cold outside is unexceptional, but walking from 38-degree heat into air conditioning, that's positively dangerous. And yet, Slovakia has a proud tradition of saunas, which are often followed by a plunge into a pool of cold water, voluntarily, with enthusiasm. Now, is the sauna good for you? Probably yes, the evidence is pretty solid. How about the cold plunge or the related otužovanie, cold water therapy? Well, possibly. The research is promising, but genuinely limited. And the combination? Unknown. Insufficient evidence. But the weird thing is the complete acceptance of cold in this ritual context. And I think it's because this cold is different. This cold was chosen. Cold that arrives uninvited through a gap in a window? Silent killer. Cold that you climb into deliberately? Healthy, invigorating, practically medicinal. A čo nie ma sarka ponožky? Však umrie. Why isn't Sarka wearing socks? She'll die! The belief is that cold applied to any external surface of the body, feet, head, lower back, will cause illness. And it's not just any illness, specifically colds, urinary infections, congested sinuses, earache, crippling back pain, trigeminal neuralgia, kidney failure. I think I am probably officially an older man now, if not actually a boomer. One morning recently, I'd had 2 cups of tea, a large turecka kava, and a glass of acidulated water. Without going into too much detail, I had to pay about 4 trips to the toilet over the next hour. I also have OCD, so by the time I'd finished obsessively washing my hands after each visit, it sometimes felt like I needed to go again immediately. Anyway, I cheerfully said to my wife, "I'm just one continuous stream of urine this morning." She turned to me and said, "Do you know why? Put some socks on." Now, I want to be honest here, because this belief is more interesting than it first appears. There is a 1992 Norwegian study in which researchers rather cruelly immersed the feet of a small group of women prone to urinary infections in cold water for 30 minutes. Several developed infections within 2 days compared to none in the control group. The proposed mechanism involves cold causing constriction of blood vessels in the urinary tract, reducing local immune response and potentially triggering a latent infection that was already there. Like with draughts and aircon, the whole sock thing is a faintly plausible belief that probably has a grain of truth to it for some people. But people take that idea and apply it to everyone, regardless of whether they're prone to anything. These beliefs are then handed down as received knowledge from one generation to the next, perhaps without the critical attention they deserve. And we remember the times when they seem to work and forget the times they don't. And it all runs on the R-month calendar, September through April. You do not go barefoot, lest the ground should suck out your body heat through your feet. You do not sit on cold ground or, God forbid, concrete. You wear a bloody hat, or else. The months without an R are the months of relative freedom. Though when on May Day this year I said to my wife, "I can go barefoot now, right?" She said, "Put some socks on, you've only got 2 obliczki." The younger generation have updated these beliefs without abandoning. They know about viruses. They know cold doesn't cause illness directly. But cold lowers your immunity, they'll tell you. Cold makes you susceptible. Which is harder to argue with because it's not entirely wrong. It's just that the specific cold-related triggers Slovaks are vigilant about, feet, draught, cold surfaces, are treated with a degree of seriousness that would be unrecognisable in Scandinavia or Britain. The belief mutated to survive contact with modern biology. That's actually quite impressive. Back to that cafe. This was one of the first things I noticed when I arrived in 1998. People will go out, they'll drink, they'll smoke, they'll dance, they'll spend 3 hours in a packed bar breathing recycled air and sharing glasses, possibly saliva. And when they wake up next morning with a sore throat, they'll blame the one cold beer they had at 11 p.m. I have one student whose mother heats her ice cream in the microwave before she eats it. I have another whose father puts his oranges on the radiator so he doesn't have to eat them cold out of the Speiser. People planning to be doctors have looked me in the eye and told me that cold drinks cause sore throats, and no amount of gentle discussion has moved them, because it is their lived experience and they know what they know. Apparently, in some Slovak dialects, you can obariť, or scald your throat with a cold drink. In contrast, when I was a child in Britain and I had tonsillitis, the doctor positively recommended ice cream to soothe my throat. And that's the thing I keep coming back to. In over half a century of life, I have never, not once, heard a British person express a fear of cold drinks causing a sore throat. Not once. So what's going on? The simple answer is that all of these beliefs, the prievan, the socks, the hat, the cold Coke, share the same underlying logic. Uninvited cold is an active agent of harm. It is trying to get in. Your body needs protecting from it. It seems that that framework, and it is a framework, not just a random collection of superstitions, was never fully supplanted by germ theory in Central and Eastern Europe in quite the same way it was further west. It mutated. It survived alongside the new science. And in some cases, as we've seen, it even has just enough biological grounding to resist easy dismissal. Obviously, Slovaks are not alone in this. The persistent myth that proportionally you lose most heat through your head comes from a 1950s US Army experiment in which soldiers wore Arctic survival suits and no hats. Unsurprisingly, they lost most of their heat through their heads because that was the only part of their body that was exposed. It's a classic progression. A practical observation, hats help keep you warm, evolves into a much stronger biological claim, which then gets passed on as received wisdom. And this one is geographically widespread. But the framework does seem to have particularly deep roots in Slovakia, and once you start seeing it, you start noticing it in other places. On pharmacy shelves, in what doctors prescribe, in the strange borderland between medicine, wellness and folk belief, the world of salt caves and cosmodiscs. And that's exactly where we're heading next time. I'm James Bloor, and this has been the Bloorcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and most importantly, make sure you wear some bloody socks.